guys, and welcome back to another episode of Relationship Tea with Tina. I hope you guys are all doing amazing. Now, I know that my last episode was pretty heavy, but I think that it would be a disservice to you because I told you that in this new series I was going to be vulnerable. I was going to share parts of myself, and sharing that story about my dad was very important for me to get off my chest, and I feel a lot better now that I did. But today I need to talk about something, and it's kind of derailing my original plan for the episodes, but I do not care because I got so invested in this story that I watched on TikTok yesterday, and I couldn't help myself. I had seen her original video. Okay, now I'm talking about Risa Tisa. I hope that I am saying that right. I had watched her original story where I think she originally stitched it with another video of some sort, and she gave this general background about how her ex-husband was a pathological liar. And I was intrigued, and I watched her little summary of it, and then I realized when I went to her page that she had posted, you guys, I'm not freaking kidding, she had posted a 50-part series telling the story of what happened between her and her now ex-husband. And this was all during COVID. And I think that it's safe to say that COVID feels like a whole nother world. It feels like a part of our lives that doesn't even feel like we lived it. And I got invested in this woman's story. And I really wanted to talk about it on the podcast today because a couple of things stood out to me. And it was ignoring the red flags. Okay, we have all done it. We are all guilty of it. I would be saying that I would be lying to you if I didn't also have my experiences with ignoring red flags, okay? There is also a hint of her admittedly talking about how she was afraid of being alone, which is why she kept ignoring the red flags. She didn't want to be embarrassed and look stupid when she was ignoring the red flags, right? And I truly believe that this is such a testament. And she kept also saying that she just wanted it to be her turn. She wanted it to be her turn. She wanted it to be her time for her happy ending. And that honestly kind of broke my heart because I think that so many people feel this way. And a lot of us stay in relationships and situationships and whatever with exes, go back and forth between relationships because we are so afraid of being alone, because we are so afraid of, well, if I leave this relationship, this person is committed to me, I'm going to have to start all over again, and or I've just wasted all of my time in this relationship, and that's not fun. But you guys have heard me say time and time again that even if you spent 5 years with someone, a year with someone, 6 months with someone, it's never a waste of time. It's really never a waste of time because you can take, at the very least, one lesson that you could have learned about yourself, about relationships, that you can now take with you into something moving forward. And my girl Risa, she ignored a lot of red flags. Okay, this man was a pathological liar. I'm going to try and give you a summary if you didn't watch the 50-part series. I started this series, you guys, I started this on Sunday around 1:30 p.m. And I had made a dedication to myself that I'm going to rest this weekend. I'm going to sleep a lot, and I am going to do nothing. And that is exactly what I did. So 1:30 p.m., I started part 1. And I took a couple of breaks here and there, but my ass happily sat on that couch and watched until part 50 until about 11:30 p.m. Now, I am not ashamed of that. I am not ashamed of that by any means, okay? But I can say that I have never sat through and watched a 50-part series of anybody else's story, ever. Maybe 3 parts, but 50? This woman was an amazing storyteller. I hope all of the comments were Netflix needs to create a series on this woman's story. Because, listen, it's not super duper original. We've seen kind of similar stories around this topic of being lied to. I think there's the Tinder swindler on Netflix that has talked about this, a bunch of different things. But more or less, this man was just like a complete pathological liar. And he made a bunch of promises to her. He would go with her to buy houses. He would go with her to test drive cars. He said he had a lot of money in the bank. He said he was a VP. So he lied about his job. He lied about his family tree, like all of his family dynamics. He said he had sisters when he didn't really have sisters. He lied about his brothers. This man would also be like on the phone, hey, having straight up conversations with people in front of his fiance, wife, girlfriend throughout the time, pretending to just have conversations, pretending to like be talking to his brother and be like, hey, baby, like so-and-so says, hey. She'd be like, oh, tell him I say hey. And she like met a couple people throughout this time, and she started picking up on the red flags. The fact that like he wouldn't show her his savings account. He said he had a savings account in like offshore savings accounts, and he would like flip his phone around to like show her the money, but he wouldn't show her these other accounts. He would take her to go look at houses with realtors, and he was straight up like the goal. Like he would straight up make offers, cash offers on these houses for like $700,000, sign his name. But then one way or another, the deal would fall through because he would never be able to show like proof of funds. He took her to like car dealerships. Basically, he had her test drive all these cars, and he made all these promises to her, getting her hopes up. Okay. When we start dating somebody, especially in a very vulnerable place, like a time during COVID, it's easy for our feelings to get taken advantage of. It's easy for people to prey on things that would make us feel really special and really happy and really seen. You know, talking about getting married and building a life with somebody, like classic love bombing. And this entire story happened within only a span of a year. I'm pretty sure it was from like 2020 to like 2021. They dated, moved in and quarantined together, got engaged, and then got married throughout this entire process, and divorced all throughout this. So if you haven't watched it, like, go watch it. If you got some time to dedicate, like, I saw this girl being like, if you want to watch it, like, you could go and spend 45 minutes walking on that treadmill and watch like 4.5 parts because they're like 10 minutes each. That's why I spent so long watching this series. But my girl ignored a lot of red flags. And she also ignored her intuition. She ignored her gut. And she was openly admitting this. She would say that, which is why I really loved watching this, because it was so real and so authentic of her just telling her story. And I think that it was a very vulnerable moment for her. And you could tell that this was a very traumatic experience for her, having to kind of relive this and talk about this. And she did a great job. She kept, everybody involved private. But, this man even lied about people passing away in his life, and when it happened and how it happened and who it happened to. And that could be extremely traumatic, especially hinder anybody's ability to then be able to move forward and trust anybody ever again. And that really broke my heart for hers, because she did a live the other day, and someone had asked her, have you started dating again? And it is now 2024, and it sounds like the divorce was finalized in 2021. And she has not started dating again because she was so traumatized by this experience, and she just is afraid. And I can empathize with that. I can absolutely empathize with that. After I was in my abusive relationship, y'all, I ignored every red flag. This man would cause fights. Actually, he was a boy at the time. Let me clarify. He would start fights with everybody at school. He was hanging out with the wrong crowd. I started noticing I was changing my behaviors when I would hang out with him. He would lie about where he was and what he was doing and who he was doing it with. And I ignored everybody else's kind of like, don't date him moments, okay? But I did it anyway. I ignored him not really caring about my feelings and disrespecting my boundaries, let alone the fact I didn't even have boundaries back then, y'all. Like, I did not even have boundaries back then. I didn't even know what a boundary was back then. But I did ignore a lot of red flags that one at the age of 21, 18 would ignore, okay? And it really came down to me not trusting myself, me having that low confidence and low self-esteem, and really holding on to the hope that he was going to change. But you know what? As I talked about in episode 2 of this season, people only change if they want to change. And people can say all the right things. People can talk and talk and talk. It's easy to talk. It's easy to say, yes, I will respect you. It's easy to say, yes, I'm going to do these things. But the hardest part is actually changing your behaviors, is actually making sure that the words align with the actions, and really paying attention to what your intuition is telling you. And I got a lot of questions lately with my clients that I'm currently working with about how to, I actually recorded also a TikTok video about how to be able to stop worrying in your relationships. And I talked about needing to be able to differentiate, dropped my phone, needing to differentiate from your anxious attachment style or any anxious attachment that you might have, comparing that to trusting your intuition. Because those two things are very different, right? Sometimes our anxious attachment style will have us thinking everything is a red flag, or have us consistently vying for validation from somebody else in our relationships and or all of our friendships around us, right? But there's a big difference between anxiety and trusting yourself and trusting your intuition. And my girl Risa, she should have trusted herself from the minute she started seeing these red flags, but she kept wanting to prove to herself, like, let's just see what he lies about this time. Let's just see what he lies about this time. And pathological liars can be extremely scary because nothing they say is true. And if you watch this story, this man lied about everything and went out of his way to lie about things. Like, he just would take her to places and take her to like a cemetery to say, this is where my grandma's buried, when like she really was not buried there. Like, it's scary. Okay. I can absolutely understand why it's scary and it's traumatizing. And it's even scarier to kind of have that realization of what we will ignore and what we will continue to make excuses for in an effort for us to not be alone, in an effort for us to just like feel like this is finally my time. This is finally when I get to be the one who gets married, when I get to be the one who falls in love, when I get to be the one who has their happy ending. But something that you really have to understand is if you see red flags, lying, betrayal, things not adding up, right? Or someone disrespecting your wants and needs, disrespecting your boundaries, making promises and never keeping those promises, saying yes when they don't really mean yes because their words don't align with their actions, don't know how to communicate, don't even take the time to communicate, have controlling tendencies. I could go on and on about some red flags, and, I've posted a lot of content about specific red flags that you do need to pay attention for. But what happens is if you hold on to that, this is finally my happy ending feeling, and I just don't want to be alone, you're kind of setting yourself up for even more disappointment later on down the line. And that's scarier. That's scarier because then you're going to look back and be like, dang, I knew. Why didn't I do anything about it? Can't go back and ever change the past, right? But you can be present in each moment, and you can work on building your self-esteem and raising the confidence in yourself and healing from any past patterns that you might be bringing into your current relationships so that you can start to be self-aware of the red flags so you don't ignore them, so you don't make excuses for them, so you don't just say, oh, well, that doesn't matter, let me just sweep that under the rug, right? Because all of the red flags matter. All of the red flags matter. And all of the green flags matter too. So something that I wanted to kind of like give you guys today is tips for how to navigate telling the difference between an anxious feeling, your anxious attachment, right? Versus being able to trust your intuition and being able to trust yourself. Because when you trust yourself, it's just such a confidence booster. But you got to be confident in order to trust yourself. So that comes with like healing your relationship that you do have with yourself, and really making an effort to do that. But what I can do in this little podcast episode, right? Healing your relationship with yourself takes time. That takes months. That takes joining me for my long-term coaching programs. That takes like really doing some deep diving work. But what I can do is I can help you figure out a little bit of differences for an anxious attachment and anxiety versus an intuition, a gut feeling. So you don't ever have to question your intuition ever again, because she's always going to be right, you guys. Your intuition is 98% of the time going to be correct. Okay, so how do we do this? I have notes on my phone like I always do, so I'm not just like looking at my phone, okay? I can memorize this stuff, but I want to make sure that I hit certain points as I'm talking to you. And first of all, something that I have kind of like a little bit of a gripe with is I want everyone to get into the mindset, if you do have an anxious attachment style, if you identify with having an anxious attachment style, please do yourself a favor and do what you gotta do. Take the steps to heal that anxious attachment style instead of consistently using it as an excuse and identifying with it. Because we can all have an anxious attachment style, an avoidant attachment style. But the ultimate goal is to get to a secure attachment, to not just try and live for forever with an anxious attachment style. And I think that this has become like our attachment styles has become such a buzzword on social media platforms that we often think that we just need to like figure it out and have a partner who can cater to our anxious attachment style. And yes, that is important to have a partner who can cater to your attachment style and help you move through it and help you navigate it. But the ultimate goal is to eventually get to that place of secure attachment. And that does take time. And that does take some healing. And that does take a lot of practice. Okay, but first and foremost, difference between anxious attachment and intuition. Your emotional reactivity. Okay. What do I mean by this? When you feel anxious, okay, and you are talking to, yes, I am an anxious girly over here. I have my like emotional support dog who knows her job, that when I do feel anxious, she will come over to me and she will like give me kisses and all the things. But you will notice that when you feel anxious, you have very heightened emotions, okay? Your fear of abandonment starts to kick in, and you're sensing that really, really, really strong need of validation from your partner to just make it better. If my partner says something, it'll make it better. It'll make it better. And or if your partner walks out of the room during an argument, your immediate fear of abandonment will kick in, okay? That is a huge emotional type of reactivity when you're having an anxious attachment. It's just kind of like, the best way to describe it is it feels a little chaotic. Feels a little chaotic for a moment because you're just reaching at anything to make you feel better. Don't leave me, validate me, tell me you love me, finish this conversation with me, right? You're operating from that emotional reactivity when your anxious attachment is in play, okay? Versus your gut feeling, okay? Your gut feeling, you guys, it's subtle. It doesn't have the overwhelming, chaotic feeling that an emotional, anxious feeling might give you. Your intuition is going to feel more peaceful. It's going to feel a little bit more of just an inner knowing and a little bit more of a moment of clarity. Okay? It's not going to feel as chaotic. It's going to feel more of a peaceful feeling inside of you. I know that that sounds so silly, but that's the best way that I can describe it. Our anxious attachment is chaotic, but our intuition is a little bit more peaceful and less reactive, okay? Consistency. Now, anybody who has ever trusted their gut feelings, and I know I have, okay, it almost feels like a nagging thing in your belly. it's like consistent. It's not just in the moment of reactivity that you feel this, but your intuition is going to be that kind of like, something's up. Something's up. And then you'll go to bed and you'll kind of try and like brush it away. Convince yourself you're just being anxious. You're just making this up in your head. Why would you do this? And then you wake up the next morning and that feeling is still there. That gut feeling is still there. It's going to nag at you and it's going to be persistent. Even when you may have had a conversation with your partner and they're like telling you everything that you want to hear. No, everything's fine. Like, you're wrong. No, like, this is fine, right? And you're like, okay, circumstances have changed a little bit. I talked about it. My partner validated me and, they didn't leave me. A couple hours later, that feeling is still there. It's consistent because it's going to be consistent until you start to listen to it. It's like that, just like a little poke. Just like, hey, that feeling, it's still here. Still here, okay? Anxiety also is a very, very physical reaction, right? Do you notice when you have an anxious moment or an anxiety attack, you start to just maybe even some people shake because it's your body having a physical reaction to a thought that you're creating in your mind or a story that you're creating in your mind, right? We shake, our heart races, right? We start having trouble kind of breathing through the moment, right? Versus your intuition, it's just kind of like that annoying gut butterfly, almost nauseating feeling here. Anxiety happens a lot here in your heart and here in your head, right? And everywhere else kind of in your body. But that intuition is going to be very kind of like a grounding more experience and happen a lot more so in your gut than in your head and having those heart racing moments. Okay, so it's different physical feelings between anxiety and intuition. Okay, and I think that it goes without saying that anxiety is often caused a lot by our intrusive thoughts. They are caused by the stories that we tell ourselves, right? Thinking worst case scenario all of the time. That sparks anxiety because if we think worst case scenario, if we get stuck in the worrying cycle, we start to tell ourselves, oh my God, my partner didn't pick up my call, so they're out cheating on me. Oh my God, but you know what? They haven't called me back in 5 minutes. Is he talking to another girl? He wouldn't put his phone down. He took his phone with him to the bathroom. Does that mean he's talking to somebody else and he doesn't want me to see his phone? Most of that are just intrusive thoughts because you don't really have that proof and you're kind of creating this narrative in your mind and you're operating from worry, worst case scenario moments, okay? Versus your intuition is going to feel a lot more, I'm going to let them take their phone with them. And I'm just going to see how I feel about that later. Because remember, like I mentioned, it's a way more peaceful than the chaotic thoughts that go on in our mind. So in order to figure out how to tune into your intuition is to first be able to sit with yourself and calm your anxiety for a second. Because the minute we feel like something's off or something's wrong, of course we're going to get anxious. Of course we're going to go through those emotions and we're going to feel everything in our body and we're going to make up all of those thoughts in our mind. So you got to move through those feelings first. So something that I advise my clients on is when you start to feel anxious, reach for the toolbox that we made together. Go for a walk, clear your mind. Sit with yourself for a minute, take a couple of deep breaths in through your nose and out through your mouth. And move through that anxiety before you start to make any decisions or before you start to really try and tap into your intuition. First, you got to move through the anxious thoughts that are going through your mind. And then once you've allowed yourself to move through your anxiety, because you will move through it, you are not your anxiety. Anxiety is just a feeling that requires you to feel through those physical symptoms of the anxiety, okay? Then, once you've quieted those intrusive thoughts and those irrational fears, you'll be able to sit with yourself a little bit more calmly and tune into your intuition and tune into your gut feeling and allow yourself to really listen to you a little bit better. And that's how you can kind of differentiate between anxiety and anxious attachment versus intuition. Honestly, the best way to just like shortly describe it is anxiety feels a lot more chaotic and up here. Intuition is going to feel a lot more peaceful and slow and down here in your gut. Okay. So when you notice these red flags, okay, yes, take note of them. Yes, address some of them with your partner. But then you got to really understand that you're responsible for what happens next. You're responsible if you're going to choose to ignore the red flags or if you're going to choose to do something about it and not ignore the red flags and stop making excuses for these people who are showing you exactly who they are through their behaviors, through their words not aligning with their actions, through their broken promises, through them disrespecting your boundaries, through them, having really suspecting, relations and doing things on social media that are just crossing a line, okay? Don't ignore those things because you're going to regret it later on down the line, maybe. And maybe sometimes people can change and maybe sometimes people can grow. That takes consistency. That takes a lot of maturity to be able to do. But as Risa Tisa will tell you, y'all, if you watch that 50-part series, you just can't ignore the red flags or it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. She knew that there were red flags in the beginning. She knew it. But she allowed her fear and her insecurities, her fear of being alone, her hopefulness of it finally being her turn to get married and have her happy ending with this guy, and her potentially lack of self-esteem in herself to know that she will be okay if this ends, and to know that there is someone out there who is going to treat her amazingly and give her all of these things that she is wanting and craving without it just being a lie, right? That will happen for you. All of those good things will 100% happen for you. You're not going to be alone forever if you don't want to be alone. You will have your happy ending. Of course you will. But you want to have that happy ending with the right person, with the person who makes you just feel at peace, right? And if Risa had paid attention to the red flags in the beginning, and she knew that she should have left early on, she knew that she should have left if she had asked this man about his criminal history in the first date, right? She knew that there were red flags in the first and second and third date that they went on. But she let it drag out and they got married, which made it a lot more complicated, which made it a lot more ugly, which the cops ended up getting involved, right? Which turned into a way more crazy situation than it had to have been and caused her a lot more trauma than she needed to go through and experience, right? And my heart goes out to her. It really, really does. But let this just be a sign that just don't ignore the red flags. Trust yourself a little bit. And if you struggle with trusting yourself, I can help you, right? That's stuff that you can learn with building confidence, with working on yourself, with healing anything from your past that you may have not healed from, okay? Those are all possible within you. And facing your fears of potentially being alone now versus dealing with the aftermath later because you just didn't want to be alone or because you were so desperate to want to get married and have this be your timeline. Y'all, Risa got a flat tire on her way to this first date. She had a flat tire. I really genuinely feel like that was the universe being like, you were not going. But she forced the situation and she made it work and she went. And there were countless moments that she had where she should have been like, this is a sign. Pay attention to the sign. Okay? So, I don't know. This is just a little bit of a lesson on not ignoring the red flags because it could turn out a lot worse later on than it is right now, just having to face the situation head on, as scary as it might be, right? So really learn to trust yourself, really learn to face your fears of loneliness. And gosh, I know that loneliness can really suck. And especially during COVID, it can make us do a lot of crazy things. okay? But it doesn't have to get that crazy. It doesn't have to get that crazy. And if you haven't watched, go support her, because I just really loved how she told that story. And I thought that it would have made a great kind of recap episode about anxiety versus intuition. And, you know, if you ever have questions about it, you know, reach out to me. I got y'all. And I love you all so much. And I hope you're having an amazing afternoon or night whenever you are choosing to listen or watch this. So make sure you like and subscribe and share this episode with your friends. And I love you all so much. Chat soon, baby.